The Stoics often reminded us that we come into this world alone, and we leave it alone. Everything in between is a gift, but not a guarantee. And yet, one of the most terrifying feelings for many people is loneliness. That heavy silence at night, when no one calls, the empty seat at the table, or that realization that most people you thought would stay didn't. But what if I told you that loneliness isn't always your enemy? What if it's not a curse, but a gift in disguise? Before we begin, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. This helps us grow and bring more timeless wisdom your way. Now, let's dive into why your loneliness might actually be the path to your greatest strength. Number 1, loneliness shows you who you really are. When life is crowded with noise, people, and distractions, you rarely hear yourself. Friends, family, and society all project their expectations onto you. But when you're left alone, the mask falls off. Loneliness strips away the performance. Suddenly, you see yourself, your fears, your insecurities, and your hidden strengths. The Stoics believe that knowing yourself is the first step to true freedom. Marcus Aurelius spent much of his time journaling alone, confronting his own weaknesses and reminding himself of what really mattered. He understood that solitude is not emptiness, it's clarity. Loneliness, if embraced, allows you to hear the voice inside that gets drowned out when life is too loud. Of course, being alone isn't always comfortable. At first, it feels like standing in a room where every sound echoes. You notice every flaw, every mistake, every painful memory. But sit with it long enough, and you realize the room isn't empty. It's full of lessons you've been avoiding. So, instead of asking, "Why am I alone?" try asking, "What is this teaching me?" You may find that your loneliness is quietly shaping you into someone unshakable. Number 2, loneliness protects you from the wrong company. Let's be honest, many of us stay in relationships or friendships not because they're healthy, but because we're afraid of being alone. Loneliness feels like a punishment, so we tolerate people who drain us, disrespect us, or distract us from becoming who we need to be. But the truth is, loneliness often saves you from worse pain. Epictetus once said, "It is better to be alone than in bad company." If you're lonely right now, it might mean life is protecting you from fake friends, manipulative partners, or people who would pull you off your path. Yes, being by yourself feels cold, but being surrounded by the wrong people can feel colder. Think of loneliness as a filter. It removes those who were never meant to stay, leaving space for genuine relationships to enter. Sometimes, you have to endure the silence so you can recognize the right voices when they finally arrive. And here's the funny part. When you stop fearing loneliness, you actually attract better people. Why? Because you're no longer desperate. Desperation repels respect, but self-sufficiency commands it. Number 3, loneliness strengthens your inner muscles. When you're alone, you have no one to lean on. At first, this feels like weakness, but over time it builds strength. Just like lifting weights, solitude trains your inner muscles. You learn how to handle problems without immediately reaching for someone else to save you. The Stoics believe the greatest power a person can have is mastery over their own mind. When you are alone, you're forced to face your thoughts, control your emotions, and develop resilience. This is mental training. It's like life giving you a personal gym membership, but instead of dumbbells, you're lifting silence, patience, and discipline. And yes, sometimes you'll feel the weight is too heavy. You'll wish someone was there to make it easier. But remember, every rep in loneliness makes you stronger. When the world gets loud again, you'll realize you can handle storms others can't. Here's the humor in it. Loneliness is like spinach. Nobody really wants it, but it makes you healthier. And if you're willing to swallow it, you'll grow stronger in ways that comfort can never provide. Number 4, loneliness creates space for growth. Think about a garden. If it's crowded with weeds, nothing new can grow. Loneliness clears the ground of distractions so you can plant seeds of growth. Without the constant pull of other people's voices, you have time to learn, create, and transform yourself. Seneca often reminded his students that time is the one resource we waste the most. When you're lonely, you actually have an abundance of time. You can read more, write more, reflect more, and invest in the skills and habits that will serve you forever. While others are drowning in noise, you have the silence to build. Many great thinkers, leaders, and artists used loneliness as fuel. They weren't waiting for someone to validate them. They were working while the world ignored them. And when they finally stepped into the light, they were unshakable because their strength was built in silence. So, if you feel isolated right now, don't just sit in it. Use it. Write that book. Start that project. Build a habit. Loneliness is a gift of space, and how you use it will define who you become. Number 5, loneliness teaches you self-sufficiency. At its core, loneliness teaches the most important lesson. You don't need external validation to live fully. Most people measure their worth by how many people love them, text them, or notice them. But Stoicism reminds us that true happiness doesn't come from outside. It comes from within. When you master loneliness, you realize you are enough. You stop chasing after approval. You stop needing constant company to feel valuable. You learn how to enjoy your own presence. And ironically, once you no longer need others, you're free to actually love them better, without attachment, without desperation, without fear. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." Loneliness gives you access to that retreat. It's not a prison, it's a sanctuary. And here's the ultimate twist. Loneliness, once feared, becomes freedom. It gives you independence of mind and heart. It allows you to stand strong when others crumble. It turns you from someone who begs for company into someone who offers strength to the world. So, don't run from loneliness. Embrace it, use it, master it. Because once you do, you'll realize it was never a curse. It was a hidden gift waiting for you to open. Number 6, loneliness helps you reset your identity. Sometimes, loneliness shows up after a loss, a breakup, a friendship ending, or leaving a familiar environment. It feels like part of your identity was ripped away. Who are you without them? What's left when the roles you play disappear? Loneliness may feel like a void, but in truth, it's a reset button. The Stoics taught that much of our suffering comes from attaching ourselves too tightly to roles, possessions, or people. When life takes them away, it hurts. But in that hurt lies the chance to rebuild. Loneliness forces you to ask, who am I really? Not as a partner, not as a friend in a group, not as someone's son or daughter, but simply as you. This can be scary. It's like being given a blank canvas when you're used to just coloring inside someone else's lines. But in that blankness lies freedom. You now have the opportunity to design your identity intentionally, not by accident. And let's admit, it's much easier to reinvent yourself when no one is watching. Loneliness gives you that privacy. You can fail in peace, experiment without judgment, and rise quietly. By the time the world sees you again, you'll be someone stronger, wiser, and truer to yourself. Number 7, loneliness teaches you gratitude for connection. Ironically, it is only in loneliness that you truly understand the value of connection. When you're constantly surrounded by people, you take them for granted. But when the room is empty, when the phone doesn't ring, you realize how precious genuine connection really is. The Stoics encouraged us to practice gratitude daily, not just for material things, but for the people we love. Loneliness makes this practice real. That one friend who checks in suddenly feels like a treasure. That family member who sends a small message feels like a lifeline. You begin to notice the beauty in simple connections instead of demanding constant entertainment. This shift changes how you show up in relationships. You stop expecting people to fill every void in you because you've already learned to be content alone. Instead, you appreciate their presence without clinging to it. Gratitude replaces entitlement, and when you do reconnect, you savor it. Loneliness has sharpened your awareness. A small laugh, a deep conversation, a shared silence. All of it feels meaningful because you've tasted the opposite. In this way, loneliness doesn't just teach you to survive solitude. It teaches you to celebrate connection. Number 8. Loneliness frees you from social comparison. One of the greatest traps of our age is comparison. You open social media and suddenly feel like everyone else is winning. Relationships, careers, lifestyles. You start measuring your life against theirs, and no matter what, you come up short. But loneliness can free you from this toxic cycle. When you are alone, there's no one to compare to. It's just you and your journey. Slowly, you realize that the only person worth competing with is who you were yesterday. This is a deeply Stoic idea, to focus on your own improvement rather than on what others seem to have. Of course, your ego will resist. It will whisper, "Look at them, they're happier than you." But when you've sat long enough in solitude, you begin to see the illusion. You realize you don't actually know their struggles. You only see their highlights. Loneliness sharpens your vision, making you less gullible to appearances. And here's the funny truth. Once you stop comparing, your life feels lighter. You realize you were never behind. You were simply walking your own path at your own pace. Loneliness can be the silence that helps you hear that truth clearly. Number 9. Loneliness gives you emotional independence. Most people live like emotional parasites. They feed on the energy, approval, and moods of others. If someone praises them, they're happy. If someone ignores them, they're crushed. But loneliness forces you to learn independence. You learn how to generate peace without external fuel. The Stoics taught that true happiness is internal, not dependent on outside conditions. Loneliness is life's way of testing whether you've learned that lesson. At first, it feels brutal. You crave validation like a fish out of water. But eventually, you discover you can breathe just fine on your own. This doesn't mean you become cold or detached. On the contrary, emotional independence allows you to love more freely. You stop clinging to people as if they're your oxygen tank. Instead, you enjoy their company as a choice, not a necessity. And yes, it might sound a bit odd, but loneliness is like emotional weightlifting. Every time you sit through it without crumbling, your emotional resilience grows. Soon, you're no longer a hostage to moods, texts, or the ups and downs of relationships. You're grounded, steady, unshaken. Number 10. Loneliness prepares you for life's ultimate truth. Finally, let's face a reality the Stoics never ran away from. Life itself is a journey you take alone. You can be surrounded by people, but no one can live your life for you. No one can die your death for you. Loneliness, in a sense, prepares you for this ultimate truth. This is not meant to sound depressing. It's meant to make you stronger. If you can learn to stand tall in your solitude now, you will not fear the inevitable solitude that comes at life's end. You will live with more courage, knowing you are self-sufficient. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that everything borrowed, relationships, possessions, even our bodies, must be returned. Loneliness, therefore, is not a punishment but training. It's preparing you to accept impermanence with dignity. And here's the paradox. When you stop fearing this truth, you start living more fully. You stop wasting time on shallow connections or meaningless pursuits. You use your time wisely. Loneliness, the thing you once feared, becomes the reason you live with depth, urgency, and love. So let's recap. Loneliness is not just silence. It's a teacher. It resets your identity, teaches you gratitude, frees you from comparison, builds emotional independence, and prepares you for life's greatest truths. This is why the Stoics never ran from solitude. They embraced it, used it, and grew from it. If this resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe so we can continue exploring these timeless lessons together. Share this with someone who feels alone right now. They might discover that their solitude is not a curse, but a hidden gift shaping them into who they're meant to be.